Adam Schiff thought it would be just another easy interview, but live on air. Trump exposed evidence that stunned everyone. Within minutes, Schiff was speechless and Letitia James was next. What started as a simple talk show turned into a career-ending moment. Stay until the end, because what Trump reveals will shock you. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you never miss what they tried to hide. The lights in the studio flickered on. Cameras panned to a packed audience. The energy thick with anticipation. A special edition of America Unfiltered was about to begin, and no one, especially not Adam Schiff, knew just how explosive this episode would become. The host sat center stage, his voice clear and calm. Tonight's broadcast isn't just another round of political theater. What you're about to witness could mark the beginning of the end for two of the most powerful Democrats in the country. He paused, the screen behind him lit up with side-by-side photos. Adam Schiff and Letitia James. These two names should sound familiar. Both have spent years hurling accusations, indictments, and investigations in one direction toward Donald Trump. But tonight, for the first time, the focus shifts because now they're the ones under federal investigation. The audience murmured. The tension builds slowly, but deliberately. But before we get into the details, ask yourself this. What happens when the hunters suddenly become the hunted? And more importantly, what if the very thing they accuse Trump of is exactly what they've been doing behind closed doors? He leaned in just slightly, lowering his tone. We've got exclusive documents, whistleblower statements, and by the end of this episode, Donald Trump himself will respond. You'll want to stay until the final minutes. Trust me, the camera cut to a reel of headlines. Adam Schiff under federal scrutiny. Letitia James named in mortgage fraud probe. Double residency allegations raise questions. Now, here's where it begins. According to federal sources, Adam Schiff listed a Maryland property as his primary residence, which helped him secure a lower mortgage rate reserved for full-time homeowners. But at the same time, he claimed his California condo as his primary residence for tax breaks. Two primary residences in two different states for two very different financial benefits. The host clicked a remote, and on the screen behind him appeared a document loan paperwork with Schiff's signature. Highlighted in yellow were the words primary residence. The host shook his head. Now if you or I tried to do that, it wouldn't take long for the IRS or a mortgage lender to come knocking. But Adam Schiff, he thought no one would notice until someone did. And then there's Letitia James, New York's Attorney General, the same woman who brought multiple lawsuits against Trump, accusing him of inflating property values and lying to banks. Turns out investigators are now examining whether she may have done the exact same thing. Sources say she misrepresented the use of one of her properties as a rental investment to qualify for a favorable loan while living there full-time. The host paused again. You see, this isn't just about hypocrisy. It's about accountability, the kind they thought only applied to their political enemies. But you haven't heard the half of it, because in just a moment, Donald Trump himself will respond. And what he says might finally tip the scales. Stay with us. The commercial break ended. The studio lights dimmed again, and when they came back up, the audience erupted. Donald Trump stepped onto the stage, not as a former president defending himself, but as a guest with nothing to lose and something explosive to say. The host greeted him with a firm handshake. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Trump. As you've probably seen, the spotlight is finally turning back on the people who pointed fingers at you for years. Schiff, James, mortgage fraud, false declarations. What's your reaction? Trump didn't hesitate. It's about time. These are the same people who called me a criminal, a con man. They spent years using the justice system as a political weapon, and now we find out they were breaking the same laws they accused me of. It's disgusting. The crowd applauded, not wildly, but with a quiet intensity, like they were all waiting to hear what would come next. When I was in office, Schiff was on every news network calling for investigations. He'd read statements into the record, pretending to be this righteous defender of the law. Meanwhile, he's committing mortgage fraud in two states. Give me a break. And Letitia James, Trump's tone sharpened. She ran for office promising to take me down. That was her entire platform. Not fixing crime in New York, not protecting families. No, just Trump, and now it turns out she may have lied on federal forms to get sweetheart deals on her homes. He looked straight into the camera. The double standard is over. They're not untouchable anymore, and believe me, this is just the beginning. The host leaned forward. You're saying more is coming, much more. I've spoken to people in Washington. There are whistleblowers, documents, internal emails. These investigations aren't going away. And if Schiff and James think they can laugh this off like they've done in the past, they're in for a rude awakening. He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. But here's what I really want to say to the American people. You were lied to over and over. While they painted me as the villain, they were pulling the same tricks behind closed doors. Now the truth is out, the host interjected. What would justice look like here? Simple. Treat them exactly the way they tried to treat me. No special favors, no protected status. If I had to face years of investigations over paperwork, speeches, phone calls, they can face it, too. Let the law work both ways. There was a new energy in the room. The crowd wasn't cheering. They were listening closely because something was shifting. This wasn't Trump lashing out. This was Trump pointing at a broken system and daring it to fix itself. And next, he said, he would reveal how long Schiff knew what he was doing and who helped him do it. You're going to want to hear this. The studio screen lit up again. This time, not with headlines, but with a single email. Dated nearly 3 years ago. Subject line: re-residence filing, urgent clarification needed. The host turned to Trump. You mentioned Schiff knew exactly what he was doing. What does this email tell us? Trump nodded. It proves he wasn't confused. He wasn't sloppy. He was calculating. That email is from one of Schiff's aides flagging concerns about declaring to different properties as his primary residence. It's all right there. The host zoomed in on the body of the email. It read, Congressman, declaring both the Maryland and California addresses as primary may raise issues with lenders or state tax authorities. We recommend revisiting the classification before submission. Trump pointed. He was warned in writing. They knew it could be illegal. And what did he do? He went ahead anyway. He signed both documents within weeks of that warning. That's not a mistake. That's intent. The audience reacted. Soft gasps, a few murmurs. The tone of the room shifted. Again, this was no longer about speculation. It was about evidence, the host continued. And what about the lenders? Did they know? Trump didn't skip a beat. No, that's the whole point. Mortgage lenders offer better interest rates for people buying their primary residence. It's a lower risk. Schiff told one bank that Maryland was his primary, locked in a favorable rate, and then told California's tax office that his condo there was his primary to get exemptions. So, he played both ends for financial gain. Exactly. He got better loan terms in one state and tax breaks in another. If any regular citizen tried that, they'd already be in court. The host turned back to the screen where another line from the email was highlighted. If you proceed with dual declarations, we recommend legal review in advance. Trump raised an eyebrow. You know what that means? Even his own team knew this could be criminal, and yet, he still did it. He gambled that no one would ever look too closely, that the press wouldn't care, that the system wouldn't touch him. He paused, but the system is touching him now. The host folded his hands. And Letitia James, Trump leaned back. We'll get to her. She's next. But before we do, people need to understand this isn't just about shady real estate deals. This is about how these people weaponize the law against political opponents while breaking it themselves. The camera zoomed in slightly on Trump's face. And we've just started peeling back the first layer. In the next few minutes, I'll show you something that Schiff's office tried to have sealed. Something they didn't want you to see. Stay with us. The studio darkened briefly. A large document appeared on the screen, redacted in places stamped confidential, not for public release. The crowd sat silent. This was new. This was real. The host turned to Trump. You said this file was sealed. How did it get out? Let's just say some people inside the system are finally tired of the double standard. This came from someone who worked on Schiff's campaign finance team. They couldn't watch the hypocrisy anymore. What's in the document? It's a financial disclosure form, filed with the House Ethics Committee. On the form, Schiff listed the California condo as his primary dwelling used more than 183 days a year. That's a requirement for claiming certain deductions in California. But here's where it gets interesting. Trump gestured to the screen. The same month that form was submitted, Schiff also completed a refinancing agreement on his Maryland home. That loan file, which we showed earlier, has him signing a statement under penalty of perjury declaring that property as his primary residence. So, both properties were sworn to be his main home at the same time. Correct, he swore to it on both documents. To jurisdictions, to benefits, and to lies, the host stepped forward. Now, just to be clear, these aren't just political embarrassments. These are federal offenses, right? Absolutely. Making a false declaration on a mortgage application is a felony. Submitting incorrect information to the House Ethics Committee. Also a serious offense, the host read from the document aloud. Primary residence occupied continuously. That's what it says here. Trump nodded slowly. That phrase is key. It means you can't just say you live there. You have to actually live there most of the year. Utility bills, voter registration, car registration, they all need to match. And Schiff's don't. Do you think he'll deny it? He might try. But remember, he's the one who always said no one is above the law. If that's true, then he should be preparing a legal defense, not another press conference. And what's the buzz in Washington? Trump smiled slightly. Let's just say Schiff's phone isn't ringing as much as it used to. Even some Democrats are distancing themselves. They know what's coming. And by the way, this isn't over. Investigators are looking at who else signed off on these forms. Staff, lawyers, maybe even financial backers. He looked toward the camera. Again, everyone who helped cover this up is now on the radar. That's how it starts. You tug one thread, and the whole thing unravels. The host glanced down at a note, and coming up, "You've got something on Letitia James?" Trump nodded. Oh, yes, her entire legal career is built on claiming to fight fraud. But what she did with her properties could end her career before Schiff even sets foot in court. That part is next. The screen behind the host now showed a different image. Letitia James speaking at a podium flanked by banners that read, "No one is above the law." Trump shook his head slightly as the camera returned to him. That slogan, she repeated it 100 times while coming after me. But guess what? The same law is now knocking on her front door. The host pulled up a new file on screen. Letitia James owns multiple properties in New York. Nothing unusual about that until you dig into how she financed them. He pointed to a section of the file. This loan application says the property in Brooklyn was a passive investment property. That classification comes with huge perks, lower down payments, reduced interest rates for first-time investors. Trump leaned forward, except she lived there full-time, had mail sent there, registered to vote from there. That's not an investment, that's a residence, the host nodded. And according to lending guidelines, that's fraud. Exactly, if you misrepresent how a property is used, especially to get financial benefits, you're committing mortgage fraud. Plain and simple, he continued, but it gets worse. One of the documents we obtained filed with the bank lists no other current properties owned. But just months earlier, James had filed a state ethics disclosure listing to homes under her name. So she lied to the bank. That's what it looks like. She downplayed her assets to appear less risky, or possibly to qualify for certain incentives offered to low-income or first-time buyers. That's not a mistake, that's a calculated move. The host flipped to another document. This one shows rental income reported on tax forms, but investigators now believe no rent was ever collected, no tenants, no leases. So, she claimed rental income for a place she lived in just to get tax benefits. Trump nodded again. It's called phantom income reporting. If proven, that's not just unethical, it's criminal. He paused briefly, letting the silence speak. This is the woman who went on national television to say Trump inflated values for gain? And here she is inventing tenants that never existed. What does that tell you? The host leaned back. It tells me something's unraveling fast. That's the right word, fast. I'm hearing the feds are already pulling records from banks and state tax agencies. They're looking at everything, emails, closing statements, even security footage to confirm who lived where. And the public, People are tired of the games. They've watched these figures lecture, investigate, smear anyone who challenged them. But now, for the first time, they're the ones being asked to explain themselves. He looked up again, and they don't like the spotlight nearly as much when it's turned back on them. The host turned to the camera. After the break, we're revealing what an inside source from Letitia James' office just leaked. Something that could change the entire trajectory of this investigation. Trump nodded. You'll want to hear this. The lights in the studio dimmed, just enough to draw attention to the next image. A blurred-out figure sitting in a chair, voice distorted, a whistleblower. Not from a think tank, not from the media, from Letitia James's own office, the host spoke. Calmly, what you're about to hear has never been made public. This testimony was recorded just days ago by congressional investigators. We've obtained permission to share it with voice and identity protected. The clip played. I worked in her compliance unit. I flagged several discrepancies in her real estate filings back in 2021. I was told directly that no one needs to see this and to leave it alone. The room was still. The host froze the screen and turned to Trump. Your reaction? Trump folded his hands. It confirms what I've been saying for years. These people weren't sloppy. They were protected. And anyone who tried to ask questions got shut down. He pointed to the screen again. This whistleblower had nothing to gain, but he couldn't ignore what he saw. Loan applications that didn't match internal records, altered timelines, inconsistent signatures, and no follow-up. None. He brought it to a senior staffer who told him flat out, Letitia's real estate isn't your concern. Focus on the Trump files. That's where we get headlines. The host leaned forward. Are we saying her office deliberately ignored internal fraud? That's what it sounds like. She weaponized her office to target political opponents while hiding her own misconduct behind the shield of her title. The host pulled out another document. This appears to be a staff memo, handwritten notes. What's the significance? Trump looked at it carefully. That's a list of properties. Notice how the one in Harlem is circled with the word change filing scribbled next to it. That's where it gets interesting. He turned to the audience. That's the property she claimed as a second home in one form and her only home in another. The memo shows someone was preparing to revise the classification after the whistleblower raised concerns, and it never got changed. No, it got buried, the host exhaled. If proven true, this goes beyond carelessness. This is obstruction, cover-up. And if prosecutors want to make an example, they've got everything they need thanks to this whistleblower. The host turned back to the camera, and coming up, Trump says there's more. Something personal. Something Letitia James never thought would come out. Trump leaned in slightly. There's a recording. You'll hear it in a moment. A conversation she had with her own legal counsel caught on tape. It changes everything. He paused, letting the silence sink in. This isn't just about mortgage fraud anymore. This is about intent and motive, and when you hear her words, you'll understand why she never wanted the public to find out. The lights dimmed again. The screen behind the host showed the words, confidential audio. Recorded October 2022, Trump sat forward, his voice calm. This tape was sent to congressional investigators. Anonymously, I heard it 2 days ago. It stopped me cold. The host nodded. Who's speaking in it? Letitia James and her private legal counsel. They thought the room was secure. It wasn't. The audio began to play. The quality wasn't perfect, but the voices were clear enough to make out. I don't want this on record, okay? But if this filing gets picked apart, it could look bad. The condo's been listed as a rental, but I stay there when I need to. Nobody checks these things unless someone makes noise. Just make sure the documents line up if anyone asks. The room fell silent. The host paused the audio. That's her. Trump nodded. That's her in her own words, telling her lawyer to paper over inconsistencies. She wasn't worried about the truth. She was worried about getting caught. The host looked stunned. This tape hasn't been authenticated publicly yet. Not yet, but I've spoken with 3 members of the investigative team. Voice match confirms it, timestamp and metadata. Check out, this isn't fake. And what's the legal implication? It shows knowledge. She knew there were issues with her filings. She talked about how to cover it. That's intent. That's conspiracy. That's obstruction. He pointed at the screen. This is the same woman who went on TV every week claiming Trump was the threat to democracy. All the while, she was manipulating property documents behind the scenes and coaching people to do the same. The host read another line from the transcript. Nobody checks these things unless someone makes noise. Exactly, that was her gamble that nobody would notice, and for a while she was right. The media ignored it, her office brushed it off. But now people are looking, and it's too late to bury it. The host set down the transcript, so we have a whistleblower, internal documents, and now a taped conversation. What happens next? That depends on how serious the investigators are. If they let this slide, it proves everything I've said about two-tiered justice. But if they do their jobs, there's no way Letitia James walks away clean from this. He paused, and I haven't even told you the last part. The host raised an eyebrow. There's more. Trump smiled faintly. Let's just say someone very close to her, someone she trusted, is now cooperating with federal agents. And when you hear what they turned over, you'll realize this isn't just about Letitia's finances, it's about how she used her entire office. To protect herself, the host leaned forward. Can you tell us who it is? Not yet. But I can tell you this, she recognized the name. And when she does, everything changes. The studio screen now showed a silhouette labeled Senior Deputy NY Attorney General's Office. No name, no face, just a title. The host turned slowly to Trump. You said someone close to Letitia James is cooperating with investigators. Is this who you meant? That's the one. Been in her circle for years, knew how everything ran, and now they're talking. Why the sudden change? Trump answered firmly. Because they realize the walls are closing in, and when people like Schiff and James get cornered, they throw everyone else under the bus. This person decided not to wait for that. The host looked down at a folder of notes. It says here, the deputy has handed over personal emails, internal memos, and even call logs. That's right. One of those emails shows Letitia requesting edits to official filings, not asking for clarification, requesting edits after the paperwork was already submitted. That's tampering. And the call logs, multiple calls between Letitia's office and a private consultant tied to her real estate transactions. The timing lines up with the very filings now under investigation. Trump leaned back slightly. Letitia James tried to build a fortress around herself using the legal system, but the person helping hold up the walls. They just walked out of the front door and turned over the blueprint. And what's the public supposed to take from this? That these people never expected to be caught. They thought they were untouchable because they wore the right title, had the right narrative, and targeted the right enemy, me. He paused, but they underestimated the truth. And the truth doesn't care what party you belong to. The host tapped the folder again. Is there one detail in this testimony that stands out? One? In particular. The deputy says Letitia personally instructed her team not to disclose certain ownership transfers involving one of her properties because, in her words, it would raise questions we don't need right now. The host looked shocked, so she knew. There were irregularities and told her team to hide them. That's what's being alleged, and remember, this isn't coming from the media. It's coming from someone who worked directly under her with access to everything. And is the FBI involved now? They are. In fact, I've heard agents are already reviewing property deeds, title transfers, and bank records going back 5 years. This isn't just one loan or one property. It's a pattern. Trump turned to the camera. You've seen the forms, you've heard the recording. And now you know even her own people are turning on her. The only question left is how far does this go? The host nodded. And what about Schiff? We haven't forgotten him. Oh, we're not done with Schiff. In fact, what I'm going to reveal next ties everything together and puts both of them in a place they never expected to be. The screen faded in with a timeline, one that stretched from early 2020 to mid-2023. Dotted across it were key dates. Schiff's loan approvals, James' property filings, and several closed-door meetings that hadn't been reported until now. The host looked at Trump. You said there was a connection that ties Schiff and James together. What is it? Trump pointed to the timeline. These dates don't lie. Within 2 weeks of Schiff filing for his Maryland mortgage, Letitia James scheduled a private meeting in D.C., not with state officials, but with a political consultant who's now under federal audit. The host squinted at the name. This same consultant worked with Schiff's team. Exactly. He handled donor strategy, campaign finance, and real estate advisement. That's the link. One consultant to power players, one financial shell game. So, what's the theory? Not a theory, evidence. The consultant helped Schiff structure his Maryland purchase as a primary residence while helping James funnel property assets through LLCs to qualify for financing loopholes. He was the middleman. Trump leaned in, and now, that same consultant is facing subpoena requests, his phone records, financials, everything. Investigators are starting to ask, was this a coordinated effort? The host tapped the table. You're suggesting Schiff and James may have knowingly used the same person to exploit legal gaps. That's what the evidence shows. And get this, the consultant received payments from both Schiff's and James' campaign accounts within 60 days of each other. The payments were listed under research and compliance, but they match up to property transaction dates, so, not just political advice, real estate advice funded by campaign money. Bingo! The host took a breath. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation anymore. It's being investigated. Campaign funds can't be used to structure personal loans or real estate deals. That's a major FEC violation and possibly a felony. Trump paused, letting the weight of that land. And if this goes where I think it's going, both Schiff and James could face not just state charges, but federal ones: money laundering, wire fraud, election finance violations. He looked directly into the lens, and remember, these are the people who claimed I was the criminal. The host turned to the screen again. So, what's next? Federal investigators are expected to interview the consultant this week. And if he flips, if he starts talking to save himself, this whole thing could explode. He knows where the bodies are buried, and from what I'm hearing, he's not willing to go down alone. Trump added one final thought. This isn't about revenge. It's about exposing the truth, and the truth is, the people who spent years trying to jail me might be the ones who end up in court. The host leaned forward, and in the final chapter, Trump will reveal what he told the DOJ behind closed doors just days ago. A move that could change the entire course of these investigations. Stay with us. The host sat silently for a moment. Before speaking, you mentioned that just days ago you met privately with members of the Department of Justice. What happened in that meeting? Trump took a breath and spoke slowly. I handed them everything. Every document, every email, the full whistleblower testimony, the recording of Letitia, the financial timeline, and most importantly, the new evidence tying Schiff and James to the same consultant. The host leaned forward. You gave this directly to the DOJ. Yes, I didn't go to the press. I didn't call a rally. I walked in, handed it over, and said, do your job. No spin, no politics, just justice. And how did they respond? They were quiet, took it seriously. I think even they didn't expect the evidence to be that complete. But I made it clear, this isn't about me. This is about a system that either works or doesn't. The host looked at him. So, what happens now? That's the big question. The DOJ has enough to move forward if they choose to. Schiff is exposed, James is compromised, and now the public knows the truth. And if they don't act, then the American people will. You don't need a badge to demand accountability. You need facts, you need proof, and now we've got it. Trump paused, then looked toward the audience. I've been investigated, raided, accused, dragged through every court in the country, and I stood my ground. Meanwhile, these two were committing the same crimes in silence. They thought they were too smart to get caught, too connected to face consequences. And now the game's changed. Schiff's career over. Letitia's hanging by a thread, and it wasn't because of political revenge. It was because the truth finally had its day. The host nodded slowly. There's been a shift, hasn't there? Yes, a big one. For years, Americans have watched politicians get away with things the rest of us would go to prison for. But tonight, you saw the receipts. You heard the recordings, you followed the money. And if the law means anything, it applies to everyone. The host turned to the camera. So, what's the takeaway? Trump answered simply, the people who cried, no one is above the law, were the ones standing the highest. But now they're standing alone, And the next time you hear them demand justice, remember justice finally came for them. The camera pulled back slowly as the crowd sat in stunned silence. No chants, no cheers, just the echo of what had been revealed. 2 names, 2 scandals, and 1 night that could change everything. The host closed the show with final words: "Where this goes next is up to the courts, but tonight, the American public got something rare. Clarity, and maybe just maybe the beginning of accountability."